My name is Chris Johnson, and this is Healthcare Tomorrow. Today we've been honored to spend some time with Dr. Van Berkel. We've got just a really exciting show for you today to really bring hope to where oncology is going and the ability to diagnose and predict what's going to happen in your near future. But before we get into the innovation, what we really like to find out is more about the people that bring that innovation to you and all of us. So I'd like to just kind of jump in, if we could, sure, and really find out about your academic background and kind of what brought you to where we are today.
All right. Well, first, thank you very much for having us here. This is very exciting, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk about some of the things that we're working on. So I'm Victor Van Berkel. I'm a thoracic surgeon. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then went to MIT for undergraduate. Went there to do physics and math, and then got a little sidetracked and ended up going to medical school afterwards. I went to WashU in St. Louis, where I got my medical degree and a PhD in immunology. And then went back to Boston to do my general surgery training, and then back to St. Louis to do my cardiothoracic training. And then I ended up in Louisville after that for my first job. And that was about 15 years ago now. And I've always enjoyed solving problems. And I think from a clinical standpoint, when you're working in the medical field, a lot of medicine is a sort of accumulated wisdom. It's, we figured out that this is the best way to do things by, seeing that, okay, this is how we don't kill somebody by doing this. But when you work in the field for a little while, you start to see the gaps of where things are done, and you're like, we have to be able to do better than that. Like this is either inefficient or inexact, or that there's just got to be a better solution for people. And I think it's that sort of idea that's been pushing me forward. Specifically about what we're talking about today is trying to figure out how to diagnose lung cancer. Like I said, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. And Kentucky in general, the United States more broadly, and then the world more specific, even more broadly than that, has a huge problem with lung cancer. The reason it's such a big deal in Kentucky is because of smoking, but that's also why it's such a big deal, I guess, in the rest of the world. But so what I spend all of my days doing is operating on people who have lung cancer. And the problem is that, unfortunately, most people who have lung cancer find out about it at a very late stage, at the point where I, as a surgeon, can't really do anything for them. That they're at a point where they need chemotherapy or they need radiation. And unfortunately, if you find out about lung cancer at a late stage, you're probably not going to do very well. The treatments have gotten better and better over the years, and I certainly don't want to make it sound like people don't have hope, but it's a lot better if we can find out if somebody has cancer when it's an early stage than a later stage. And what I think everyone in the field knows is that the tools that we have for diagnosing lung cancer at an early stage are not particularly good. And so what we've been working on is trying to figure out a better way to do that.
So when you think about kind of the reason why you went to medical school,
yeah,
and so you had this shift where you were doing obviously a lot of math.
Yeah.
So you were already kind of going down the math and science route.
Yeah.
What shifted this? I want to help people. I want to be in medicine.
Yeah, I found that there's a lot of beauty in pure science, and I think there's something terrific about searching for kind of capital T truth, right? How the world fits together. But ultimately, I found that when I was spending all of my time just looking at spreadsheets and, formulas and calculations and stuff like that, that I didn't feel like I was doing something to help anyone. And while, like I said, I appreciate the beauty of that, what I realized after a little while is that I was spending my free time, I was volunteering in the emergency room, and I was doing stuff to try to make me feel like I was impacting a person right in front of me, as opposed to just sort of the generalized world, I guess. And that was the point where I started thinking like, well, maybe I should do something more involved with medicine. I was still pretty gung-ho on science, which is why I ended up doing an MD PhD. When I started my MD PhD, I honestly didn't think that I was going to be taking care of patients. I thought I was going to be running a lab somewhere, and the MD part would help me figure out, how to frame problems appropriately, but I wasn't actually going to be taking care of patients. And then when I went to medical school, I found that was what I really loved. I loved and specifically surgery, that I loved the immediacy of it, the see a problem, fix a problem.
But you were drawn to research before you even went to medical school then.
That's true, yeah.
So you've always had this inclination to look for solutions.
Yeah, I think like a lot of engineers or scientists, I'm kind of a tinkerer. You like to take a problem and see like, well, I'm not exactly sure how this works, but and you break it apart and you're like, oh, now I got to figure out how to put it back together again. And just I like trying to understand why things happen, and how they happen, and that in medicine, that's frustratingly sometimes that's only the first part of the problem. Like you figure out what the problem is, and now you're like, okay, well now how am I going to fix that? And that in medicine, there's still a lot of learning that we have to do, and that's been the most exciting part for me, is trying to find out if there's a better way that we can take the knowledge that we know about a disease process and help people get better.
So does that also drive the desire to be in surgery, because you're kind of having an immediate solution? You're able to fix something with your own hands right there.
Yeah. So a lot of times the question that I get from, so we have a lot of medical students that come through the service, and they're like, why did you pick surgery? Like, what was it that forced you into this? And so the story I tell them is, so when I started so for the people who don't know, so medical school, the first couple of years of medical school is just books, right? It's just sitting there memorizing stuff and learning about how the world works. And the last 2 years of medical school are where you do your rotations, where you go and you start actually learning the nuts and bolts of taking care of patients. And the very first patient I took care of, I started on pediatrics, was my first rotation. And the first patient I took care of was this little 14-year-old girl who had cystic fibrosis. And she was very sweet to me. Her family was incredibly kind to me. I'm sure I was the 400th medical student that had taken care of her. And I came in with my tie and asked all my dorky little questions, are you sexually active? And she's like, no, I'm a 14-year-old with cystic fibrosis. I'm not sexually active. And the parents were like, that's funny. Everybody asks that, that sort of stuff. But I was excited because I was thinking about doing infectious diseases at the time. I liked my PhD was in immunology. And so I was very excited because I was like, oh, she's going to have all these weird infections and we're going to deal with the antibiotics and try to get her better. And I took care of her for the whole month that I was on the rotation. And she never really got better. Like we would fiddle with some things. She'd get a little bit better for a while and then she'd get sick again. And eventually I had to rotate off the service. And then I went and I did my medicine rotation, and then I did my surgery rotation, which I unexpectedly really enjoyed. And so then as I came into the fourth year of my of medical school, you have to set up what are called sub-internships, where you do like a little specialized thing to see like, okay, is this really what you want to do? And so I was deciding at the time between pediatrics and surgery, which are two very, very different worlds. And so I did two things. One was from a surgery standpoint, I picked the rotation that had the people who were known to be the biggest collection of jerks in the hospital. The surgeons at the time were just a bunch of really very difficult people to work with. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And if I still like it after that, then maybe this will be something. So I did that rotation and I still liked it. And I was like, all right, let me try the pediatrics rotation. So I go back to Children's Hospital. This is now 9 months later. I go to actually a different floor in the hospital. And I start working there, and lo and behold, the same girl is there again. She had gone home for a little while and come back and whatnot, but so I got to take care of her again. And then one night when I was on call, she got a lung transplant, and then she got better, and went to college and fell in love and did all the stupid things that kids are supposed to do. And I was like, well, hell, I want to be that guy. That was the surgeon who did that operation fixed her problem. And I think that sealed the deal for me, certainly for surgery, and then got me thinking more globally about transplant, which is one of the things that I do now, and thoracic surgery, which is operating in the chest. And so that was kind of there are intellectual reasons, but that was sort of the emotional hook that I think about sometimes when I'm operating on people.
So did you ever have any friends or family that kind of influenced these decisions as well, or was it more the patients you saw?
So it was certainly it was mostly the patients. I think that my kind of late career move towards surgery has been impacted by some personal things as well. So my dad died of lung cancer. He was a carpenter, a general contractor. And the way that we found out about it was that he was framing a house. And he was working on the house, and he dropped his hammer, and he couldn't figure out how to pick it up again. He couldn't make his hand do the motion to pick up the hammer. And so everybody thought he was having a stroke. And so we ran him to the emergency room. And that's when we found out that he wasn't having a stroke, but what the problem was is that he had a 16 centimeter lung mass with a bunch of brain metastases. And that was the first symptom that he had. He didn't even have a cough, didn't have any pain. He had a bunch of brain mets, and that was it. We started him on treatment, but that happened he had that first event in July, and he was dead in September. And that was, well, thank you. It was a long time ago, thankfully, but it was that was I think that's one of my touchstones when I think about lung cancer, and that's a story that I tell a lot of my patients, because unfortunately a lot of people with lung cancer say, I feel fine. Yeah. I don't, nothing hurts. I don't have a cough. I feel fine. What are you talking about? And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why lung cancer is such a bad disease, is that it typically doesn't have symptoms until it's very late in the game, like having brain metastases or growing into the chest wall, and so you have pain or something along those lines.
So obviously there's a lot there. I mean, you're being driven not just by your abilities, but you're being driven by a lot of heartstrings. When you think about, going back to the oncology, were there certain data points that you, as a physician, looked at and you said, this I can affect this. Yeah. I personally can make an impact because I have the desire with research. I mean, tell me about, because obviously there was a little bit of an aha moment for you.
Well, I think a problem that we've had in the field for a long time is this question of how do we diagnose people with early stage, right? Because if it's at this later stage, there's not a lot that we can do. But if we can find lung cancer when it's just starting, when it's just, a centimeter or so in size, then the options for treatment are a lot wider and a lot better. If we treat it when it's just a centimeter, your long-term survival is really quite good. And so the question is always well, how do we find those? And that's something that has been looked at in a lot of different ways over the years. The best study, and the one that drives a lot of what is happening now, was something called the lung cancer screening trial. So this was a huge study that was done in the United States, where they enrolled 50,000 patients. They had 25,000 people get CT scans once a year for 3 years, and 25,000 people get X-rays once a year for 20 years, or for 3 years, excuse me. And then they tracked those people and found how many cancers did they find. And the study was overwhelmingly positive for getting CT scans. In the original study, the relative reduction rate of death from cancer was 20%, which, to put that in context, that is a better improvement than what we see with colonoscopies for colon cancer. It's better than mammographies for breast cancer. It's better than Pap smear for cervical cancer. This was an incredible finding. Everyone's like, oh, this is great. We need to start doing CT scans on everybody. And so, but the problem with that study, and this is where kind of our technology started coming in, is when you look at that study, like I said, there were 25,000 people that got CT scans. In that group, they found 600 and some change cancers. They found 11,000 nodules. So they found spots in somebody's lung. So 11,000 spots, but only 600 cancers. And what that meant is that all these people who had these CT scans, 1 out of every 3 of them had something on the scan that needed to be followed up on. Either getting another CT scan or getting a biopsy, or sometimes me going and cutting that spot out just to find out what it is. And that was a 96% false positive rate. And that's not great, right? That adds a lot of cost into the system, adds a lot of stress into patients' lives because they know that there's something there, but they don't know what that is. And so really we were looking for like, okay, well, how do we still find those cancers, but get rid of all this extraneous junk that comes along with the CT scans? And around that time, there were a couple of researchers at University of Louisville, a chemist named Michael Nance and a chemical engineer named Sean Fu, who had developed a test looking for tuberculosis. And essentially what they had done is they had taken essentially a small microchip and coated that with a special chemical that traps some of the chemicals that are in your breath on the chip. And they were using that to diagnose tuberculosis. And so we looked at that, and there was me and then my partner, his name is Michael Busamra, who's a thoracic surgeon there as well. We thought, well, maybe we could use this to identify patients with lung cancer. So your breath is very complicated. There's a ton of different chemicals that come out of every breath that you make, essentially. And most of them are very unstable. They react with each other, they react with the air, and they just kind of dissipate very quickly over time. And so what was great about this particular technology is that you essentially breathe in the bag gets squeezed out over the chip, and that breath then gets trapped on the chip and trapped in a way that now it's stable. So it doesn't react with anything else, and now once it's on the chip, it can just stay like that until you have a chance to evaluate it. And then you can take the chip, you can elute all the chemicals off of it and run it through a mass spec and see what all the different chemicals are. And so you get a whole image of all the different chemicals that somebody is exhuming in their breath. And when we then took patients who had cancer and patients who didn't have cancer and looked at their breath, perhaps not surprisingly, there were different chemicals that are present in the patients of the patients who had cancer versus patients who did not. And that was what got us very excited, because if it was true that we could identify somebody as having lung cancer just from looking at their breath, then we have a way of finding out about it that's easy, that is cheap and fast, and more specific than what we were getting from the CT scan.
It seems like because of that, there would be all kinds of applications for this. So that seems pretty exciting from a research standpoint,
yeah,
to be able to go and analyze and look at all kinds of ideas.
Well, and I think that's one of the things, I mean, obviously what I got very excited about was the possibility of diagnosing lung cancer, but you're right that as we have worked with this technology more and had some more experience with it, it does look like a platform that we're going to be able to diagnose multiple diseases with. The classic story that this has been known since since Hippocrates in ancient Greece. If you're a diabetic, your breath smells different, right? There are a lot of different disease processes that change what comes out when you breathe. Now it's just a question of seeing if we can identify sort of a signature in the breath that would allow us to diagnose diseases a little bit more easily.
So if you think about, in essence, you're predicting that you're going to have lung cancer. Well, is that a fair statement? Or?
So, no, I think with lung cancer, we're not predicting, we're just identifying it.
You're identifying.
We're finding out that somebody has lung cancer at a stage where the lung cancer is small enough that it's an easy thing for us to treat.
Okay. So how far in advance from when a patient would start showing signs and symptoms are we talking about? Is this...
Well, the goal would be that we would find out about it before they had any symptoms at all. Unfortunately, like I said, most people, when they have symptoms, they're already in a later stage of the disease. Almost everybody at very early stages, so if you have a stage 1 lung cancer, essentially nobody has symptoms. And so that's the point where we want to find out about it, before the patient even knows that there's anything wrong.
So it's sort of like with diabetes, how people now will say, well, I'm pre-diabetic.
Right.
And because they know they're pre-diabetic, they're going to aggressively change lifestyle, maybe go ahead and start on therapy. Yeah. They'll start to have different behaviors or therapeutic changes in how they're treated in order to address the knowing that they're pre-diabetic.
Right. I think that with any disease process, the earlier you find out about it, the better your options for deviating off that course, right? For figuring out a way to deal with that disease process. Another example would be breast cancer. So with mammograms, as we're finding these smaller and smaller lesions, these in situ carcinomas, so cancers that haven't had a chance to really develop into full cancers yet, the treatment for those is very easy. You can just kind of lop that out, and typically those people do extremely well. And if we could get to that point with lung cancer where we're finding out about it just as it's getting started, I think we would have a lot fewer people die from lung cancer, which is really what we want.
Tell me a story about a patient that you had to give them the information, you had to break it to them, where if we're talking in the future, that's the same patient that it's a different discussion. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the majority of the conversations that I have are people who have found out that they have cancer, but that it's, because I'm a surgeon, a lot of times the people that I see are people who are early stages, because that's how we treat them, right? And so everyone is still shocked, typically, because again, most of these people don't have symptoms, and so they're reeling from that when they come into the office. And what I have to tell them, is something like, yes, this is a problem, but the good news is that we have some good options, and we can do this operation, we can get rid of the cancer, and that should be that. And we just keep an eye on you and make sure nothing else happens. Unfortunately, sometimes I get sent people who are further along the pathway, or that when we get imaging, it's not just that they have a spot, but they have a couple of big lymph nodes, and obviously things are farther along. And that's a much harder conversation because, everyone asks, what are my chances? Am I going to die from this? When am I going to die from this? And if it's stage 1 and we do an operation, then I'm like, in 5 years, your chances of being here, 90%. If it's really small, 95%. Those chances are excellent. If it's at a point where it's already in the lymph nodes, that number drops way down, down to 20% if it's stage 3. If it's stage 4, now we're talking about single-digit likelihood of being alive in 5 years. And that's a much harder conversation because you have to maintain hope, but you also have to be realistic about what your odds are. And you say, look, we're going to do everything that we can for you, but you have to know that the chances are not very good. And that's a tough conversation to have with people.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So when you think about the today problem versus with a solution that you would bring to market, kind of talk to me about what will it feel like for the patients? I mean, what is your hope in the exam room when they find out that it's not good news, but now it's different?
So my hope is that I'm having a lot more of the conversations where it's a very small lesion where I'm saying, like, look, I'm going to go in there and take care of this, and that's going to be that. And that's what we're trying to get to. The big problem that we have with lung cancer, again, is that because there aren't symptoms, not many people are getting screened. Like, not many people who are at risk. So folks who have smoked for many years, who are at a pretty high risk of getting cancer, don't do anything to find out if they have it until they start having symptoms, and then it's too late. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is figure out how to get people to get screened. If you think about colon cancer, right? The survival from colon cancer has gone up a great deal over the last 20 years because people have started getting colonoscopies. And they've found out about their cancers at an earlier stage. If you think about all the people who should be getting screened for breast cancer, the people who should be getting screened for colon cancer, and women who should be getting screened for cervical cancer with pap smears, most people get those scans done. You know, for breast cancer, that number is actually really pretty good. It's kind of pushing 60-70% of people who should be getting scanned do. When you look at lung cancer, that number is 6%. It's an incredibly low number. The people who qualify to get the scan, it's not that they have to pay for it out of pocket. If they just, go to their primary care physician, the primary care physician says, yeah, get a CT scan, writes the order, it gets paid for. Very, very few people are getting it done. And that means that we're not shifting towards these earlier stages of diagnoses. So the hope is that with our technology, that we can bring that 6% up to the 60 or 70% that is happening with the other cancers. The reason that we think that we can do that with ours is that it's easy. You don't have to make an appointment to go get a CT scan. You're in your doctor's office. He gives you essentially a balloon. It says, blow in this balloon. We're going to take that to the back room and put that on the chip, and then we're going to tell you in a couple of days whether or not we have anything to worry about or not. And I think that that's a much easier thing to convince people to do.
Absolutely.
And I think the hospitals and insurance companies are going to like that too, because it's cheaper. It's easier. With our specificity being better, the downstream stuff of the other scans you have to get, biopsies, all that goes away. So it's better for the patients, it's better for the healthcare system. And I think we'll end up having a big impact on the community as a whole.
And it's a surgical solution rather than a therapeutic solution that is going to take years if they're lucky.
Right. And also from a cost perspective too, I mean, from the patient standpoint, nobody cares. They want to be alive, right? That's the only thing that matters. And for us, that's the only thing that matters too. But for the healthcare system, me operating on somebody is expensive. Someone going and getting chemotherapy for 6 months is really expensive, logarithms more money. And so not only is it better for the patient if we can get it earlier, it's better for everybody else, the insurance companies, the hospitals, once again. So
before we kind of wrap it up for a quick break, I'd like to bring in Aaron Roebuck, who came in with you, and kind of get into the device, do some demonstration, and just talk about where we go from here. So with that, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back. So we're back from break, and we have been joined by Aaron Roebuck, president of Breath Diagnostics, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about this technology and where breath is going to take the future. Aaron, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your background and what brought you to Breath Diagnostics?
Absolutely. And again, thanks for having us, Chris. So excited to talk with Dr. Van Berkel here about Breath Diagnostics. A little bit about myself. Yes, Aaron Roebuck. I started out as a respiratory therapist and worked in both children's hospitals, adult facilities, ended up becoming a manager and director of a children's hospital in Washington, D.C. Then went from there and actually went into industry and worked with a couple of companies bringing device and drug innovation to the market. And then I joined Breath Diagnostics as the president of the company October 1st of last year of 2024. And it's been a great ride so far and really excited to share this technology with you.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about exactly what you're doing and how is this going to evolve? I mean, let's maybe do a demo and then just talk about all the applications of where this could go.
Sure. Where the magic really starts is with this little chip, this microreactor, our patented microreactor that we have on the table here. I'll just hand this over to you real quick. Just hold that in your hand there. From a patient standpoint, all the patient really needs to do is do one, we call it our one breath technology. It's one breath into this bag right here. And we're going to have you be our patient here real quick, Chris, if you don't mind grabbing this bag.
Sure.
That stem right there. This instructions for this, the easy instructions for this are really, as you're talking, I may even say like, hey, what's your name? You say, my name's Chris Johnson. And right after that, just as you're talking, just breathe right into that bag. Nice one, easy breath. It's not a deep breath in and exhale really hard. It's truly just normal talking. So
okay.
If you don't mind stating your name, Chris, and then just
say my name and just breathe in.
My name is Chris Johnson, and then just start breathing normally into that bag until you have a nice full exhale out and you're done.
My name is Chris Johnson.
That's perfect, Chris. And from there, Victor's going to grab that bag from you. We have one of our microreactors, our chip, right on what we call our evacuation station. That's just a fancy name for a pump that pulls that air right through our microreactor. And we have our one breath technology, one breath. It's also one press of a button on this evacuation station. Once that button's pressed, what will actually happen is the breath you just breathed out that has those volatile organic compounds you guys spoke about earlier, those biomarkers that are in your breath, get pulled right through our chip. And from there, and again, as a patient standpoint, you're done. You can move on about your day. From there, we get that breath on that chip and we do what we call eluting the sample, which is a fancy word for just saying, take a little bit of water and squirt that through. And the reason that's important is we're taking all of those precious organic compounds that are in there, getting them into a liquid vial, a liquid sample into a vial, and then that just gets run for what we call, or what goes through a mass spectrometer. That looks at our sample at all these biomarkers for our detection of, right now, lung cancer, but plenty of other diseases that may be on the horizon as well. That's how simple it is. And yeah, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and again, we talked a little bit about it beforehand, but once it comes out of the bag and is on the chip, now we're not in a rush anymore. We can take that chip, we can either do the elution and do the analysis there, if we need to send it to a different lab, for it to get taken care of. So if this is out in the community somewhere, they don't have to have a big fancy machine to do the analysis. They put it on the chip, put it in an envelope and send it to us, and we take care of the rest.
And Victor brings up a very good point. These VOCs are very fragile. So to get a really clean, easy way to take those volatile organic compounds and get them stabilized as quickly as possible, that breath, all that essential information that you just shared by breathing into that bag, getting that through into a sample that's now really secure, and like you said, can take some time until it needs to be analyzed.
So the only thing we've done is breathe into a bag,
yes,
put it on the device, and you press the button one time, and you're pretty much done in the doctor's office.
Yep.
That's it.
Then it goes out, and then you have exactly what you need to know within 24 to 48 hours. And that is compared to, again, what's the current?
Well, so if you're getting a CT scan to look for lung cancer,
right,
then you go to the doctor's office, they says, okay, you need to get the CT scan. They give you an order for that, and you have to get that scheduled. That's going to be a week, probably into the future at least. Then you have to come back, go to wherever the radiology group is that has the CT scan. You're going to be there for the scan itself takes 15, 20 minutes, but you're going to be there for a couple hours, as any trip to the doctor's office is. And then you have to wait to get the results of that, and that will probably be another week, would be my guess.
So speed to knowledge or understanding or diagnosis is dramatic. I mean, we're talking about a pretty dramatic improvement.
And speaking as someone who has a clinic and sees patients, having them come back to do something is always a limiting issue. Nobody and everybody knows that from going to the doctor. If you go and you're like, you want to be done with it so you can move on with your life, going there and being like, okay, now I need you to come back and do another test, I think is a big portion of what is limiting the number of people who are getting these. And so if you just go to your primary care physician for your regular checkup and he's like, hey, while you're here, breathe in this thing here, then it's done. And you don't even have to, you don't need a prescription, you don't have to worry about it, it's over with.
Too easy.
Yeah.
So you've got the speed in which you understand and know, but it seems like, going back to that earlier conversation, what about picking up on those patients that we've been missing? Is there a percentage that you're kind of hoping that you can catch that we're not with CT scans?
So I think, what we're aiming for is to get everybody who is considered high risk for lung cancer, which, as we talked about before, of that population, only low single digits of percentages are actually getting it done. But ideally, we would get everybody at high risk. And currently, what is considered high risk in the United States is over the age of 55 with a greater than 20 pack year smoking history. I think that would be our minimum, would be to try to do that. We know that not everybody is going to get tested for things. If you look at, mammograms for breast cancer, the testing rate is somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. And I think if we could achieve that, we would still save an incredible number of lives each year from diagnosing cancer at an earlier stage.
Tell me a little bit about some of the different research that you have looking at other than oncology.
Absolutely. Our main focus as Breath Diagnostics is still and will always be lung cancer. That being said, and again, with your breath that you have right here, there are so many biomarkers in there, we can absolutely use this as a platform technology to look at different diseases, not just respiratory diseases, but anything that's going on in your body. That being said, we're highly focused and will remain focused based on our outstanding data and personal experiences that we've had to focus on lung cancer as a true lung cancer diagnostic tool.
So when I think about lung cancer and the research you're doing and this commitment to solving this problem, part of it is it probably takes more than just your facility or your team to do this research. Are you talking to other academic institutions in order to drive that research? Are you looking for partners around the country to kind of join this mission?
So absolutely. So certainly as we move towards trying to get FDA approval for this device, one of the things that the FDA is going to want is not just breath from Kentuckians, but breath from people in California, people in Arizona, people in New York, people in Florida. We're going to want a wide geographic spread of people. And certainly partnering with hospital systems, other academic centers, we've had preliminary conversations with quite a few places looking at that. And I think as we kind of ramp up into doing larger trials, that's going to be one of our focuses is coming outside of just Louisville.
So you've already started those conversations with the FDA on what this would look like in order to bring it to market, kind of the preliminary methodology discussion?
Yeah, so we've had preliminary discussions with them. We've put the the framework of a trial in place. There's a lot of the nuts and bolts of that obviously still have to be nailed down. And obviously to do that, we need money. And so getting financing for the company to be able to fund those trials is really the short-term focus of what we're working on.
So for those that don't know as much about bringing a diagnostic tool to market, what does that process look like? I mean, what are the milestones to make this available for patients to have a solution?
You have to look at it as really kind of a two-pronged approach. Definitely, as Victor mentioned, the engagement with the FDA early and often, making sure you're doing things the right way from the start. But also, when you're looking at a diagnostic tool specifically, and you're looking at reimbursement, you don't want to be that company that celebrates that big FDA approval win and then says, oh yeah, we need to talk about how do we get reimbursement as well. One of the nice things for our board, we have quite an outstanding team. Victor had mentioned some of our organic chemists and chemical engineers. We also have one of our thoracic surgeons who was a former head of the CMS. So worked a lot with the Medicare, Medicaid side and the reimbursement side. So making sure that we have not a strategy just for the FDA approval, but also for the reimbursement side, and making sure everything in-house is in order. We really feel like we've got the right team in all the places from a quality standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, regulatory standpoint, and obviously we need the physician leadership, which we have right here. We have some really outstanding thoracic surgeons on our team, so I feel like those are really the approaches, making sure we have an FDA approach, but then also a commercialization approach with reimbursement. And I think we're well on our way.
So as far as, obviously the show's Healthcare Tomorrow. So when you talk about tomorrow, it's always a question of timeline. Is there a rough timeline that you're hoping for?
Yeah, we're absolutely looking for approval in the near future, honestly. But to Victor's point, getting our trial started first. We feel positive about the results we're going to get. So getting the trial underway, making sure again that we are following all the regulations with the FDA, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, but really looking for approval over the next couple of years, and then commercialization from there.
So to kind of take a step back, because we've talked really about where things are going, but we haven't really discussed Breath Diagnostics and where you've come from. I believe you were an early part of getting the company moving in a certain direction. So talk to me a little bit about, why start this company and bringing it to where it is today.
Sure. So I was one of the founders of the company. So there were some of the people that we've talked about on the earlier, Sean Fu, Mike Nance, Michael Busamer, and myself. And I think it was really trying to fill that gap that we were talking about, that we saw this technology, saw that it has the potential for having a huge impact. I think, for me and Dr. Busamer, I think first we were thinking about the community that we deal with every day. Like I said, lung cancer patients are essentially all that I see in clinic, and knowing that we could do a better job there. But then when you look at the numbers worldwide, like there's the potential for a lot more people that could be helped. And I think that was the driving force for us, was that we have a tool that could be incredibly useful. And that's really why we founded the company, was to get that out there, to try to make a difference.
That makes sense. So that happened which year?
2015. I'm looking at you. You weren't there.
No, but that's when the company did.
So about 10 years.
Yeah,
so you've been
right.
at it for about 10 years, yeah. And that's pretty common. I mean, it takes a good while to start from an idea, start your research, really do your bench testing, and kind of go through all the iterations of failure until you find success, I guess.
Yeah, I think that was certainly some of it. Some of it was getting enough data so that we felt like, yeah, this is really going to work. But it's also worth mentioning, out of the 4 people that I mentioned, there were no businessmen there, and so from a business perspective, we didn't really know how to go forward, and that has been a big part of bringing on people like Aaron, who have helped us take the next steps towards actually becoming a company, as opposed to just some people with a good idea.
So as far as the future, where does tomorrow look like for Breath Diagnostics? I mean, from an organization standpoint.
Well, we had mentioned for Breath Diagnostics, we again are highly focused on lung cancer and really helping those and finding early detection of lung cancer. That being said, Victor had mentioned earlier how many people percentage-wise for breast cancer, prostate cancer get tested, and how low those screening tools or how those screening numbers are for lung cancer. So for us, yes, we want to make sure we get those numbers up, but why stop it at cancer? Honestly, we see this as a platform technology, like I said. So when we talk about you got your mammogram or you got your colonoscopy, it'd be great if we're all sitting here next time talking about, hey, Chris, hey, Victor, did you get your breath test this year? So turning that into the annual next thing that you should be getting to detect lung cancer and beyond.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the hope would be, your breath is just sort of a sample of the microenvironment of your body. And like I said, we know that there are diseases that are going to manifest in the breath that comes out. And so if you look many years down the line, what we would hope would be that this would be just part of the standard yearly physical that you get, and that it gets treated sort of like, the Star Trek tricorder that kind of gives you a scan and says, okay, you've got a problem here, you got a problem here, you got a problem there, that the breath can, give us a say like, okay, it looks like you're having trouble with this particular problem. Let's see if we can do some more specific testing or start you on some treatment to keep that from being a bigger problem. That's what we would hope for. And I think that we have, as Aaron has mentioned, we have great data on lung cancer, and we have some encouraging data about other disease processes that we're kind of continuing to work on.
That's fantastic.
And one of the things, Chris, that makes us really excited is sitting right in front of you, this microreactor here. When we talk about starting in 2015 and how far the company's come from a technology standpoint, this patented chip right here really is the game changer, and for so many reasons. But why this is so important, there is other breath technology out there. The other breath technology, the current breath technology, other than what we're bringing to the table here today, uses what are called thermal desorption tubes. So that quick exhale that you did, the 5-10 second exhale that you did, you're looking with thermal desorption tubes more like a 20 to 30 minute breath test, where it's collecting that breath over time. The concern with thermal desorption tubes is they need to then be heated up, which can break down those precious VOCs that you just collected before they're run. And when we were going through the demo earlier, one of the last parts we talked about was eluting the sample, turning that into a liquid. Running that sample through LCMS, which I'm obviously not a organic chemist or a chemical engineer, but running it through a mass spec from a liquid standpoint can really save time. GCMS, if you're running it through gas, you're talking about 6 times longer than how long it would take to run our test. So on the back end of the test, you're looking about 6 times faster to run that to the mass spec. And on the front end, again, 5-10 seconds of a breath instead of 30 minutes. So from a time standpoint, but more importantly, collecting a sample that's actually going to be stable and can be used to detect lots of different diseases, hopefully.
So that's what makes it unique.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's that to being able not just to capture it quickly and run it efficiently, but more importantly, once you have this precious sample, you don't want to degrade it and you don't want it to break down. So not just the collection method, it's more of stabilizing what you have.
It seems like a better sample, a more stable sample, would also open up the door to a lot of different ways that you could get it. You could even go to a pharmacy and let CVS and Walgreens take the sample, no different than they do some of the other things that they do right now.
Yeah, so I mean, there's nothing else aside from what you see right here that you need in order to get the chip loaded with the sample. And then again, once it's loaded, it could just go in an envelope and get sent somewhere. Right. So you're right, like it would be easy to have them in a primary care physician's office, but it would be easy to have it at Walgreens. It would be easy to have it at some place where people could just go. And I think then it comes down to a question of what is the easiest thing for the patients, and what is going to allow, and certainly it doesn't have to be one or the other either. We just get that in as many places as possible so that it's as easy as possible for people to get the testing done.
So every device that ever comes to the healthcare arena has generations, and it kind of evolves into the next better, more efficient, easier for patients to use. What do you see with this?
That's a good question. I think I would love for it to be faster still. Yeah. Like I would like, because it does take a couple hours for the air to get pulled all the way over the chip. If we could do that faster without losing signal, I think that would be good. I would also like our turnaround from once it's on the chip to getting the sample. I'm a little greedy, I suppose, as that goes, because we're still looking at only 24 to 48 hours. But as a clinician, I would like to do the test and tell the person right there, right? So I don't have to like call them back or have another appointment with them. I can just be like, all right, this is what we're going to have to deal with now. Those are tough things to improve upon from where we are. But I think that's a goal for us for the company going forward. That's your Star Trek. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine that she likes to say, if you could wave your magic wand, what would it look like? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great way of explaining, how a device or any process could look if it were a magical solution. When you think about where you're at, I mean, could you have even thought about this 10 years ago to be really to a place to start the trial? Has it taken longer, or are you sometimes surprised really where you're at?
Well, given that all of my training is in medicine, right? Like I don't know anything about running a business, and getting from doing the tests, right? First meeting with Sean and Mike, and us thinking like, this might work for lung cancer. And then going through all the paperwork at the university and actually starting to collect breath, and then looking at that first bit of data and being like, wow, this might actually work. Getting from there to here, I don't know that I was ever sure that it was going to happen, to be perfectly honest. It seems, and this is a lack of experience, I suppose, more than anything else, it seems kind of magical to me that you can have an idea and actually turn it into a product that shows up in the world. And so I'm excited that we are where we are. It has taken longer than I thought, but at the same time, we're here, and that's amazing to me. So I'm very excited about it.
So you started the company 10 years ago. What were you doing 10 years ago?
10 years ago, I had just left the hospital to go into industry to work on drug and device design and approval, and some clinical education as well.
And now you're the president of Breath Diagnostics.
Absolutely. Pretty exciting.
So, you go backwards in time 10. Mm-hmm. It really begs the question, what does it look like in 10 years in the future? I mean, that to me is pretty exciting to think about what you've been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. Have you thought much about that?
Yeah, I mean, my hope would be that 10 years from now, this is that the breath analysis is the standard first-line diagnostic tool for a wide variety of diseases. That it is, you go and you have your yearly checkup with your primary care physician, and you blow in a bag, and that gives you an idea am I worried about anything? Or do I just come back next year? I think that would be what we're aiming for. And each day that goes by that we're working on this, I am more and more confident that that's going to happen. And that's, as a clinician, that's very exciting to me.
Do you see a role in AI in the next 10 years and getting you there?
Interesting you brought that up. I was just going to touch on that when you were asking about the future, but this really not the future. It's here right now. We have seen, we're not reliant, as you can see from our technology, we're not reliant on AI. That being said, adding AI as a component to review the data that we already have and the biomarkers that we already have laid out, to add that on top, you're talking about an increase. We already spoke on the lung cancer data that we had on the 94% sensitivity and 85% specificity, getting to about 99% sensitivity and extremely higher specificity as well by adding the AI component. And there are some really neat technology out of the University of Louisville, actually, that they've shown us what those models would look like with our device. So absolutely, in this day and age, I think you always have to look at and consider AI. And on top of that, we've seen some really good preliminary data on that as well.
So when, as we mentioned a little bit before, your breath is very complicated. Like, there are a lot of chemicals that come out of there. And when we started this 10 years ago, using AI for data analysis wasn't really a big part of how things were done. The tools were a lot more primitive. And so the biomarkers that we saw for lung cancer were very obvious. It had to be something that, as you're looking at it from a person, you're like, oh wow, that number's a lot higher in these people and it's a lot lower in these people. Like, okay, I can pick that out. But when you take that whole data set of all the different chemicals that show up and then run it through an AI filter of saying, like, okay, you look for patterns, have the machine look and see, okay, are there other patterns that we can see? It does a better job than people do. Its pattern recognition is really what AI is good at. And I think that is going to, as we incorporate that into our data analysis, is going to make our numbers look better still.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving into some other applications in the future, because it sounds to me like there's a wealth of opportunity to really go and solve problems all over the place, whether you're taking care of patients or looking for ways to improve things in the hospital. This really kind of opens the door to a lot of solutions.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that the audience should know about Breath Diagnostics that we haven't covered? Here's your open door to share anything on your mind.
I guess I could dive into a little bit. We talked about the human story, we talked about the clinical data, but the market itself. So we talked earlier on, Victor painted a pretty grim picture of how many people actually get scanned that should and that qualify for scanning. And even the American Cancer Society has widened that availability, larger age range, regardless of whether you quit smoking or not. So even more of a population that can be covered and reimbursed for scanning or for getting a CT scan. So that being said, if we just increase that 6% that Victor mentioned earlier, that get their lung cancer screen or get their CT, but if we were to do that breath test, let's say 50%, we took that up to 50%, you're talking about, and these are sort of crazy numbers, about 6 to 7 billion in annual revenue. So quite a high number there. And really the accessible U.S. market in general is about 62 billion. So we were talking billions here, and it's quite a high number. Now, we're really focused on the human aspect, the clinical side, saving lives, but from a business perspective, there's quite a market out there as well, and quite an opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I want to thank both of you for spending time with me today and sharing your company, your innovative technology, and really making sure that we're aware of the hope that we're going to have tomorrow. If you think about the whole point of why we're doing this podcast, it's really to spotlight and bring awareness to the innovation of where we're going, and to make sure that everyone knows that tomorrow is going to be a lot better than today. So thank you for your 10 years of pouring in and investing yourself into this technology, and thank you so much for championing it as the president of the company.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.